We can go back to an economy that's built on outsourcing and bad debt and phony financial profits. That's what we saw before 2008. Or we can fight for an economy that's built to last, built on American manufacturing and American energy and skills for American workers, and the values that made this country great.
What do we have to show for 3.5 years of President Obama? Is it easier to make ends meet? No. Is it easier to sell your home or buy a new one? No. Have you saved what you needed for retirement? No. Are you making more at your job? No. Do you have a better chance to get a better job?
No. Is this economic recovery built to last? Building it is the challenge posed by President Obama at the State of the Union. It is being debated by the candidates right now, and today we're going to engage in that debate and try to dig beneath it to see what opportunities the country may be missing. Thanks to our partners at the Miller Center of the University of Virginia, we have assembled an all-star panel of experts. To my right, as always, George Will, Carly Fiorina, former chairman of Hewlett-Packard, also co-chair of Mitt Romney's presidential campaign in California, David Walker, former Comptroller General of the United States, CEO of the Comeback America Initiative, and from what I read online, perhaps an independent candidate for president this time around. To my left, Paul Krugman, Nobel Prize-winning economist, New York Times columnist, also at Princeton University, and author of a new book out tomorrow, End This Depression Now. Jennifer Granholm, former governor of Michigan, now host of The War Room on Current TV. And Eric Schmidt, executive chairman, former CEO of Google. Welcome to all of you. Welcome to our great audience here at the Night Studio. And George, let me begin with you, because we just saw some new growth numbers for the first quarter of this year, 2.2%, kind of mediocre, giving fuel to some who say this is the worst economic recovery since the Depression.
Yes, the question, I think, the threshold question is not is the recovery built to last, but does it exist in this sense? Would we be talking about a recovery if the unemployment rate were 10%? I asked that because the chairman of the New York Fed recently said that if workforce participation today were what it was when Obama was inaugurated, the unemployment rate would be well over 10%. We are now 50 months have passed, and we're not nearly back to the pre-recession employment level. This is the longest string of consecutive months of 8% or more unemployment since the Depression. 5.5 million fewer people are working today than were working before the recession. The president recently boasted, he said, we in 3 months have created 600,000 jobs. In the recovery from the Reagan-Volcker recession of the early 80s, in 1 month there was more than 600,000 jobs created, and in another month 700,000.
And Paul, we have seen a pattern here, though. Every recent recovery has been worse than the one before.
Well, actually, this is not especially worse than the recovery from the 2001 recession. If you actually just look at the job gains or lack thereof, they're more or less on track, and if anything, a bit better.
Sector.
No, even in the aggregate, and that is an important point. If you actually ask what is different between the Obama economy and the Bush II economy, the answer is actually unprecedented reductions in government employment. Private jobs, the private job creation record under Obama is vastly better than it was under Bush II. Way better. So private employment is almost back to where it was when Obama took office, whereas under Bush it was down more than 2 million at this point in his presidency.
Answer to that?
Well, I think we actually have 3 structural problems in the economy right now. The first is that we are destroying the entrepreneurial foundation of the nation. Right now, big companies are doing pretty well because they have lots of global markets, but small business, more of them are failing and fewer are starting now than in the last 40 years. So if we don't restore small business, we're not going to have job creation.
Can I pick up on that point
Yes, absolutely.
right now? Because she brings up 2 important points. Number one, in the Wall Street Journal this week, they looked at 35 big multinational corporations and found that 75% of the jobs they were creating were overseas. I want to have you address that, but also the point on small businesses. A lot of your clients, your advertisers are small businesses. Are you seeing them come back now?
They are as they get online. The core issue, I think, about small businesses is half of them are still not even online. And the growth rate of businesses that are online is twice that than the ones that are offline. They actually are net job creators. Carly's right. We've got to get the small businesses growing.
The Wall Street Journal also noted that in the first decade of this century, that those same businesses, the multinational businesses, cut 2.9 million jobs in this country, but grew 2.5 million overseas. So globalization certainly has benefited them, but it hasn't benefited us. And the question is, in this economic time when we have a slow recovery, what are the policies that we can adopt that would grow jobs in the United States? Can we tie tax policy to growth in the United States? Can we look at what other countries are doing to be more active about planning and about inviting investment clusters, you name it? We just don't do any of that because it's wrong to intervene in the economy.
I think that's actually a very misleading point to look at this job creation overseas. I'm not a big fan of giant multinationals, but the reason they're creating jobs abroad and not here is that's an effect, not a cause. That's because other countries have been more successful at generating recovery. It's because China had an effective fiscal stimulus program and we did not.
It's also much
because
lower wages,
Brazil,
isn't it?
No, but that was always going on. What's really distinctive here is that we've actually had effective recession-fighting strategies in the developing world, but not in the advanced world.
I want to bring that question to David Walker, because one of the things we're seeing right now is you also learned this week that Great Britain, this is not the developing world, but Great Britain slipped back into recession. It raises this whole question. Great Britain, other European nations cut back severely. You're saying we have to deal with our debt, but how do we balance the need to deal with the long-term debt and to get growth right now?
We have two issues. We have a short-term challenge and we have a structural challenge, and we need to recognize the difference. You don't want to have significant cuts or significant tax increases in the short term because we have a weak economic recovery, we have high unemployment and higher underemployment. At the same point in time, we have a number of structural problems. Our fiscal policy, tax and spending, our education policy, our infrastructure policy, our basic research policy, they are unsustainable at the present time.
Those are the long-term issues. I want to get to more of those in later. But as you look out over the next 6 to 9 months, where politically are the most important, what are the big X factors in the economy that you're keeping an eye on?
Well, what the economists call an exogenous factor, which is a sort of meteor from elsewhere. You have Spain, you have Europe, you have the problems that what Paul Krugman calls the bond vigilantes might actually exist. He doesn't think they do at the moment.
But not
some
for
people
us.
Might,
not for any country with its own currency.
That's right, but which rules out the Spaniards. So something like that could happen. But what is hard to answer is the question, what's different now? We've had 11 recessions since the Second World War. Even with 11 recessions, the average growth rate since the Second World War was 3.3%. When we're not in recession, it's been 4%. Why are we at, as you just said, 2.2%? What are we doing
But we know
differently?
the answer to that. This one was brought on by the worst financial crisis since the 1930s. And there's overwhelming evidence that the aftermath of a financial crisis is different. It's not like the Reagan recession, where it was imposed by the Federal Reserve, which pulled on the economy, basically imposed a recession to bring inflation down and then let it rip again as soon as that was passed. But this is one where they were trying to overcome the overhang of debt, the overhang of housing that's never going to be sold, that was left by the bubble of the middle of the last decade.
But we're also trying to overcome something else, and I think it gets to Jennifer's point. I said there were 3 structural issues in the economy. One is small business. There are 2 others. The rest of the world has also changed. And the 2 other structural problems in our economy are we now have the single highest business tax rate in the world. Guess what? With the highest tax rate in the world, we see the same thing around the world that we see in states. States with lower tax rates have more jobs, more people. People leave states with higher tax rates. The data is crystal clear. But the third structural problem we have is our education system. Our education system is not keeping up. And so if you talk to people in Silicon Valley, where Eric Schmidt comes from, they'll say, we've got jobs and we have a really hard time finding people. We now know, the data is clear, that the quality of our education system is slipping, the quantity of education that we give our children is slipping. If we don't solve education, get small businesses up, going and growing again, and have a competitive tax rate for businesses in the world, then we will not have a robust recovery.
Nothing you said about business taxes is actually true.
Everything I said about business taxes is true.
But it's not true. Well, if you look at the actual tax collections,
this is an academic discussion.
If you look at the actual tax collections in the United States on business, they're lower than other advanced countries. And if you look at the alleged finding that high business taxes cause job losses in states, it goes away on even this, kick the tires even slightly, and the whole thing falls apart. It's just not true.
Well, and let me just say, too, I mean, governors can chase one another around the country in terms of offering tax incentives and low rates, but it's a terrible national economic strategy. You are just moving the deck chairs around on the Titanic. The question is, as a nation, what are we doing to compete to get those jobs in this country, and how do we be competitive?
Schmidt, because and Carly raised the point as well. How bad is that mismatch between the skills you need at Google and the workers you see?
It is huge. Our industry is growing rapidly. We are unable to hire the technically trained people we need. There are shortages, not just in my industry, but in many technical industries. There are shortages of sophisticated manufacturing engineers in America because the sum of our educational system is not producing enough. If I go back to the question of why is this recession different, there's at least two good reasons. One is the ever-present nature of globalization is now much stronger, so it makes everybody more competitive. And also because of advances in automation are making it less needy to hire more people. How do you solve that problem? You don't regulate that. You actually create more of those kinds of businesses.